Okay, so fear. I'm starting with fear because fear is such a super powerful emotion. And I believe that it's an emotion that's really widely misunderstood. Now, there's a lot of different definitions of fear out there, and each one is just about perspective. And so we all see the world differently because we have a different perspective. And I believe the same thing with fear. Some people will say that fear is that false evidence appearing real, but it's really just fantasy, it's not truth. Um, and that is true, to a certain degree. But the feeling of fear is very real. And the feeling of fear, in most cases, will prevent you from taking action. And that's the big thing to be able to understand about fear is its impact on you. The other thing is sometimes we don't want to acknowledge or recognize that fear is what's keeping us from doing something, and so we make excuses and we hide it. We try to bury it under the rug. And if we're burying it under the rug and we're not acknowledging that it exists, then we can never address it and we can never move past it. So, fear in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a trigger that our subconscious mind sends us saying, hey, this is not a path I've gone down before, danger, 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 because it's unfamiliar. And we've talked about our subconscious mind and that it likes familiar, it doesn't like unfamiliar, it doesn't understand what's good for us or what's bad for us or what's truth or what's fantasy. It understands what's familiar and what's unfamiliar. And so anytime that we go down a path that's unfamiliar, our subconscious mind perceives it as being dangerous. But there's other things that trigger fear as well. If we've had a bad experience or that we know somebody who's had a bad experience, then that leaves an imprint in our mind and we're like, oh no, can't do that, got to be scared, got to be careful of that. So to kind of give an example, what I want to do is share with you one of my worst fears. And anybody who knows me will tell you about this. I've done some pretty outrageous things because of this fear, and it is a fear of spiders. So it doesn't have to do with, health per se, but what I want to do is be able to describe the fear piece. And then once I have done that, we can then apply it to fears that get in the way of us moving forward with health. So for as long as I can remember, I have been afraid of spiders. It just is what it is. I can, I can make excuses. I can say my mother was deathly afraid of spiders and she instilled the fear in me, which is true, but I still own that fear, right? It's my mother didn't say, oh, you have to have this fear. And by the way, carry it with you for your whole life, even after I've passed and gone on. And incidentally, my mother lived with me for 20 years and she killed the spiders. So she probably had a worse fear than I did, and yet she was obviously a braver person than me. So when we think about, this fear for spiders, it's a couple of things. Okay, now, so have I done outrageous things? Yes, I have paid my son $100 to come get rid of a spider because it was this big. I kid you not. It took up the whole bathroom. You couldn't even walk in there because it was so big. And so he had to come and get rid of that while I vacated the house until he came and did that. Many years ago, I actually, I had been seeing the spiders, but there was always somebody there to get it right away. And on this particular day, I was married at the time. My husband was at work. My mother was upstairs. And the spider was in the doorway, and I couldn't cross the doorway into the bedroom. And so I went upstairs wrapped in a towel. I wouldn't go into my bedroom. I called my husband at work, said, you need to come home. This is an emergency. And I put on my mother's clothes and said, come on, let's go. Grabbed the cats, dropped them at the vets, picked the kids up from school, and moved into a hotel until my husband bombed the house. So, yes, ridiculous, right? It's totally irrational for me to have that fear because really, when I think of it and I break it down, those spiders are far more afraid of me than I am of them. And ultimately, once I see them, I have control over their life and death. And so then why should I have the fear? I mean, I'm 100 times bigger than they are. And yet, when all of a sudden I'm faced with that spider, I no longer think rationally. Now, I have gotten actually better, even though I've done outrageous things, because when I lived in Massachusetts, they were much smaller spiders. And so since I moved to New Hampshire and I live in the middle of the woods, I can actually deal with the smaller spiders and with minimal trauma. So it just is what it is. But it isn't just is what it is, right? This is a fear that I choose to allow to continue on. Now, I have allowed this fear to spur me into doing some positive action. So, for instance, I religiously make sure that the house is sprayed inside and out. I know that every spring I'm going to see spiders, and I brace myself mentally for it, but I also make sure that I've got things around me that are going to be able to help me deal with those spiders, such as making sure that there's always bug spray. Kids, right? It used to be dollar bills and it used to be candy bars. Now they're grown, they're better. My son actually sprayed the whole outside of the house this past week for me, just saying, I don't want to get woken up in the middle of the night because you are facing a spider. So, I try to proactively do things that are going to then put me in a better situation because I don't want this fear to control my whole life, even though I still do get irrational and do stupid things around the fear of the spider. Um, but it's important to be able to understand the context of fear because we want to be able to really understand what's going on. So I have this, it's irrational. It's still a strong feeling that lives within me, and it's something that I continually work to say, okay, there's certain things that I need to be able to do in life. And there are times, right? I remember when I first moved into the house and there was a spider on a pillow. And I was like, okay, am I going to just stop unpacking and not do anything further because of the spider, or am I going to somehow deal with the spider? So I got brave enough to kick the pillow outside, and of course the pillow got thrown away along with the spider, but still I overcame, a certain portion of that in order to be able to continue on and do the things that I need to do. And that's how I've gotten so that, now the smaller spiders, this year I'm like, well, at least I'm manifesting smaller spiders. So I'm trying to just, put it in a context, and then it's something that I continually am working on to say, okay. So step number one is I have to be able to recognize that I have that fear. And so that's the first thing that we really have to look at to be able to think about it. If we know we have the fear, then we can start taking steps to say, okay, how am I going to handle it when this situation comes up? It's not blindsiding us. And so that's why I really feel that acknowledging that fear is so important. If we pretend it doesn't exist, or we make excuses to justify why we have it and say, okay, then we're going to have it because we're justifying it, we're not really doing ourselves a justice. It doesn't mean that the fear is going to go away. I believe that everyone has fear. And if maybe it's a fear that's going to impede you from getting where you want to go, or maybe it isn't. But everyone has fears. It's just what we do with that fear that defines us as a person and as a character. For me, so I have some great stories, right? So the next thing we have to do is we have to determine, are we going to allow this fear to control us, or are we going to control the fear? So for me, it really depends. Now, the time that I paid my son $100 to get rid of that huge, ginormous spider out of the bathroom, I came very, very close. Now, this spider was swimming in, bug spray, because I was actually spraying the house when I came upon it. And, almost mustered up the courage to try to be able to bring the spider outside by myself. But in the end, I failed. Is the long and the short of it is I had the dog outside and said, okay, I'm just going to take the dog for a walk. Text me when it's gone. And, my son was living 45 minutes away, immediately got in his car, came up to the house, got rid of the spider for me, texted me when it was gone. And amazingly enough, it was still living after all of that bug spray. So I was glad I didn't have to deal with it. But still, you know what? The rational part of me says I'm 100 times bigger than that spider, right? If I scooped it up with a shovel or something, it's not going to come get me. It doesn't fly. So it's funny how, these fears can really take control of us. Again, the first step is being able to recognize it. And I share with you this, one very active fear that I already have, simply because I understand it's a process. I don't for a minute say I'm an expert at how do we get rid of fear, because I'm living proof that and so we all have these fears that we live with and that we deal with, and that's normal. It's just that we've got to be able to work on a process of what are we going to do. So are we going to allow that fear to control us, or are we going to control that fear? If we say, okay, no, we're not going to allow that fear. Now, there's a lot of other things that I have fears about that I have simply stepped through. Why? What's the difference between my spiders and these other fears? It has to do with the end goal, right? So my spider fear becomes an inconvenience. So, sometimes I miss a shower because the spider's in the bathtub and I won't take a shower. Right, or something like that. It becomes an inconvenience to me. But what's the end goal at the end of getting rid of this fear of spider that is, I don't have a big why connected with why I really need to get rid of it. But on the other hand, there are some things, right? I'm an introvert by nature. So even doing these videos or holding these meetings, right, that's pushing through a fear level for me. And when I go to hit the capture button to do these records, right, I pause an extra minute. Okay, am I going to do it? Am I going to do it? Do it, right? And then I just, it's the same thing with, the current job that I'm working in as a program director for the wound care center, right? I have to go out into, different doctors' offices and be able to community outreach. I'm an introvert by nature, right? So community outreach is not something that comes naturally to me. And especially when I started, I do it far, far less now, but especially when I started, I would get all the way to a doctor's office and then choose not to get out of the car and go in because there was that fear. Ultimately, then I'd have to go back and eventually conquer that fear to be able to go in, because the end purpose is community outreach is very important to me, being able to get the word out about the service that we offer. And I want that service to be known so that we can help more patients that have wounds. And so therefore, that's what pushes me beyond, right? My end goal is stronger than the fear that I hold to get me there. And that's the whole thing. It's just to be able to put that understanding into place. What is your fear stronger than your end goal, or is your end goal stronger than your fear? And if your end goal and where you want to go is stronger than what your fear is, so this comes back to our why, making sure that we've got that really strong why, then we're going to, first of all, once we've recognized it, we're going to then say, okay, what are my steps that I'm going to take to be able to walk through this? And then that's the whole, big thing that we're going to do is say, okay, what are the next things that we need to be able to do? So let me give you another example. I fell at karate a few months ago. Now, I fell the last class before the dojo was closed for a week because it was school vacation. And so it was dojo vacation as well. So I was really proud of myself. I got back up and I was able to finish out the rest of class, which was, only like maybe 10 minutes. And after the fall, I'm taking my Moringa products, and so I was able to succeed in not having to take any medicine. So no ibuprofen, no Tylenol, and those were all really great things. However, I had a fear about going back to karate because I was afraid I was going to fall again. So the first week after vacation, my schedule at work was very busy. I couldn't get there. The next week after that, I could only get there one day. The next week after that, I could only get there one day. The next week after that, I couldn't get there at all. Very, very busy schedule. Couldn't get there, right? So finally, I was like, all right, this is ridiculous because I have an end goal in karate, right? You all know I want to get my black belt. That's what I'm striving to do. Well, I'm not going to get my black belt going to one class or no classes a week. And that means that I have to be able to say, what is going to be my plan to overcome this fear of falling again so that I can get back into class and be just there 100%. So first step is I recognize, okay, you know what? This fear is starting to impede with my goals. I can't do that. I've got to make a change. So I came up with two choices, two options. All right. My first option is either commit to going to class 3 times a week and keep going 3 times a week until I have gotten over that fear, because every time that you go and you have a positive experience, it gets easier. And I do the same thing with the spider. So I know spring is my worst time for the spiders. And after that, I know I'm not going to see any spiders all winter long. So every morning I get up, I go to the bathroom, I look in the bathtub to make sure there's no spiders, because for some reason they like to go there. And every day that I go and I don't see a spider, I build more confidence that the next day there's not going to be a spider there. And so it's the same thing for class, right? Every day that I go to class and I don't fall, I get more confident in my ability and my skill of being able to go to class, and that I can do what I need to do while I'm at class. My second option is if going 3 times simply because, okay, now I've recognized that I have this fear, I've recognized that this fear is getting in the way of what I want to do. So I've made the plan. I'm going to go 3 times a week until I've gotten this fear over. Now, what happens if that doesn't work? Well, I already have a plan B backup, right? So that my plan B backup is if I miss class, I'm going to be honest with myself. I'm not making excuses. If I don't show up for class the 3 times a week that I've committed to, I'm going to march myself into Sensei's office and say, Sensei, I have a problem. Ever since I fell, I have this fear and it's getting in the way of what I need to do. Because you know what? I'm sure that this isn't the first time he's ever encountered something like this. He probably has some tools that maybe can help me. So maybe if I wasn't so proud, I would go to him straight up first, but no, I have to try it my own way first. And so far now, I've gone 2 weeks in a row, 3 times each week, and I've been able to give 100% and be at class, and I feel good about it. So I think that because I acknowledged to myself that this fear was getting in my way, that it was holding me back, and that it was a fear, right, rather than making excuses, because every reason that I haven't been at karate has been, of course, legitimate because I've been working late or, I had to be out of town. And some of the times I wasn't really around and able to go. So some of them were legitimate, but when you really have that true desire, right, you find a way to, how can I get into another class? How can I make it up? Or if you miss something in one week, you double it up the next week so that you still have that momentum that's carrying you forward. So for me, that's what, I've committed to do, to be able to say, okay, this is how I'm going to move past that fear, because my end goal of getting my black belt, which means committing to going to karate 2 to 3 times a week. And right now my commitment is 3 times a week until I'm 100% over this fear. And then at that point, it will always be the 2 to 3 times a week that I keep doing. And I noticed in the last class I was much more confident. I can even do the move now that I did falling, and I find that I do it almost more naturally because I've been working so hard at developing it. That's it. It isn't that, okay, I don't remember that I fell. I do, but that I'm developing more confidence in my ability to be able to do the stepping and things that I need to do. So that's the whole, big thing about fear. One of the things to really remember is action diminishes fear. So the more that we don't take action, then we're allowing that fear to grow bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. At least if we're taking action, whether it fixes it or whether it doesn't, we're taking action. It puts the fear into a better place of perspective. And so that then it doesn't become so life consuming, because fear can really paralyze people. And so that's the whole thing, is we don't want to get to the point where that fear is really paralyzing us. Okay, I've gone way over my 10 minutes. I guess I got wrapped up because I didn't even look at the clock. So we're going to stop here. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about love, and we're going to talk about fear, and we're going to talk about the energy that's associated with them, and then we're going to talk about how that all ties into health. All right, so I'll see you in a few minutes.